Hello, SEMA students. I am really happy to give you this little video overview of collaboration levers and barriers to assist you in this activity, the second activity for class on Friday. I'm hopeful that I'll also at some point be able to connect with each team live, but if technology fails us, at least this will give you a little opportunity to provide some background. So I'm just reading another screen over here as well. This little lesson will kind of support some background for the second activity, what I called the collaboration activity. And by now you should be in your breakout room with your team and watching this short presentation to give an overview. But in context of thinking about structure and control, and I think linking back to our material on teaming from our last class, a really great important activity that we need to do when we think about structuring organizations is assisting coordination and assisting collaboration. So we have that ongoing tension between differentiation and integration, and whenever we have differentiation, we have this idea of kind of external boundaries and the need to connect and coordinate across those boundaries. And even in relatively small organizations, we need to collaborate among people. We need to, as we talked about in the teaming class, understand where expertise resides, where there might be innovation occurring in our organization, where we might be able to leverage, if we think about Gold and Campbell's parenting advantages and other tests of design, where there may be things or activities in the organization that we should find ways to connect up and collaborate on and leverage, rather than having redundancies occur, innovations occur that may help in one place and could help in another, but we're just not aware that those innovations exist, or we're not, we haven't created the conditions for us to identify those in our organization and leverage them in other areas. So that's what we're looking at when we think about collaboration. And clearly it's a part of they're going to log me out there, so let me just keep that going. Clearly, this is a part of when we think about structure, because from our readings and from the case and from your own analysis of how organizations work, structural decisions affect the extent to which collaboration might be sort of easier or harder. So in terms of background, just to support this, I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunities for collaboration in our organizations, and to think about, let's see, what are some kind of common areas that can benefit from more collaboration in organizations. So I've already mentioned innovation, and I've also, there's also operations systems or decision making where we might need more information from a part of the organization we're not getting it from to make better decisions in another part of the organization. And then sales, oftentimes there's an opportunity to leverage contacts across different customer groups, different sales groups, go forward with those things like a parenting advantage or a platform advantage, so that we don't have multiple parts of our organization talking to a single customer with different information or inefficient practices, etc. So these are all places where we know we can improve performance by better collaboration. So in the pre-class survey, I included a measure from Morton Hansen's work on collaboration in organizations to look at collaboration opportunities for each of these three types of collaboration: innovation, operations and decision making, and sales. And so one of the first things you'll be doing is opening this up, and this is a picture of the spreadsheet that is posted on Canvas. And what you'll see here is that there's a column for the potential for cross-unit innovation, and this is scored out of 100 points. And so you answered a series of questions about innovation and the opportunity for it in your organizations, and you'll see there's a kind of a wide range of scores here, ranging from pretty low opportunities to very high opportunities. And then the second column is going to look at the current level. So you were asked about potential and current, and you can see that, in some cases, Katie felt that, there's sort of there's an opportunity, and the current level actually matches it pretty well here. Andrea, it's interesting, feels like there's quite a lot of potential here, but maybe not as much current going on. So this is where I would suggest in each of these you do some comparing and contrasting to think through and understand the potential that you have in your organization on each of these types of collaboration. So what's an important thing here is that not all of these are going to be really vital for every organization. And so this exercise can help you as a leader think about where really is the big bang for your buck to invest effort and energy into supporting collaboration in your organization. So step one is to look at this. And I posted in this set of slides online as well the benchmarks that Hansen, he basically studied about 150 companies and looked at the level of opportunity for innovation and then what's actually going on. And he found that if your scores are sort of 0 to 50, for example, let's look at cross-unit innovation. If your score was 0 to 50, it might be a reasonable potential to put some effort there. But if you were out here, I think we saw Belma had 100, then there's great potential for supporting collaborative activities in your organization. And that just means that it's important to start looking at things like difficult links tests, market advantage tests, some of the other Gould & Campbell material to say, do we have in place the things that support this kind of cross-unit innovation? And what would we need to do to change? Would we need to create some new roles or new positions? Would we need to think about other kinds of alignment or incentives? We'll go on to talk about that. But this is the first step, is to open up that spreadsheet, talk through the scores for each member of your team in terms of potential and current, and then look at this benchmark and come to some conclusion about how are things in your organizations. Where would you think about putting more efforts in terms of supporting collaboration using formal structure? Okay, so once we have identified where there could be opportunities, the next step here is to think about what are barriers to collaboration. And Morton Hansen identified several different barriers. There's 4 key ones I want to just briefly introduce. First is the not invented here syndrome. Many of us have talked about NIH, not invented here, an unwillingness to seek input or learn from others. And some of that comes from, if we look at the causes, typical causes, we can see that some businesses have insular cultures, right? There's really hard boundaries and a sense that something about our culture is specialized, is different, can't learn from others. And if that kind of attitude's prevailing, we're unlikely to have a lot of recognition that in fact there is innovation that occurs in other places that could be valuable to us here. We also see status gaps. So, some parts of the organization, we've talked about this in terms of power, may not want to give up their knowledge because it might give up some power or status. There's some organizations where people feel like if we ask for help, it makes us look weak. That might indicate a problem with psychological safety and not enough emphasis on learning and innovation, so that these other concerns are getting in the way. And likewise, fear of losing power by giving something up, fear of looking stupid for not knowing the answer. Those are all reasons why not invented here can happen. The second barrier to collaboration that Hansen identified is the hoarding expertise problem, or an unwillingness to help problem. And this just means, again, sometimes knowledge is power, expertise is power, innovative ideas are powerful. It might make one division look a lot better in the performance metrics, profit metrics, etc. So here we sometimes have problems where if there's competition among divisions in the P&L, people may not give up intellectual property or other things to other areas. That fits with narrow incentives. But sometimes it's not malicious. Sometimes it's actually people are just too busy. Maybe they really have good intent to try to go out and look or provide help to others, but they don't have the slack resources to do that. So that's another reason why we might see barriers to collaboration. A third type of barrier is the so-called needle in a haystack problem, or an inability to know where expertise is. So this increases exponentially in larger organizations. So if you're in a very large organization, global, distributed, it's very possible that there are activities going on that could be very beneficial to leverage or learn from across the organization, but it's too difficult to even know where those are located, and it's hard to understand. So a lot of companies might invest in information systems to try to help with this, but the research that Hansen's done, some of the research I've done, is that it still ends up needing to be somewhat personal. There still needs to be opportunities for people to be exposed. So this is where inputs like rotation of employees, etc., can be helpful. And then finally, the last barrier is what we call the stranger problem. And I think this ties well. There's a couple things that go on here. One is this might be poor networks, weak networks, and people not really having the contacts they need to get knowledge if they need knowledge. Maybe they know where something is, but they don't actually feel like they have the influence to ask for it or get that to be moved in the organization. The weak tie problem. And then the other thing is tacit knowledge. So concrete knowledge is something you can type up and send off and someone knows, but there's an awful lot of knowledge in organizations that requires almost firsthand demonstration. And if we don't have the kinds of relationships or connectivity in our organization to support that sort of transmission, we oftentimes will not benefit from collaboration on these more tacit forms of knowledge. So these barriers I also asked you about, and if we think about looking at the spreadsheet here, I have scores here for not invented here, and in this case the base measure is 300. So we can see that in some cases, there's a really quite high score here on not invented here. Others, there's a pretty low score. So these are places, again, where I would suggest you find all the scores for your team and talk about these, compare and contrast these scores. The other thing to take a look at here is there are benchmarks, and I put basically on this little slide, these are paraphrases of the items that went into the barrier score, so you can take a look at what the individual items look like. But basically these are the mean scores for class, and you can kind of compare that. The means are also provided in the spreadsheet. Okay, so the final things, and here we go with the benchmarks again. So here you can compare and contrast this in your team just to look at what the lowest quartile is. Maybe those barriers aren't a problem. You can see over here if you're starting to get out into the 200s to 300s, in this case for not invented here, that would suggest that's a pretty significant problem and one that it would probably benefit you and your organization from thinking through structural solutions and interpersonal solutions to try to lower that barrier. So what I'd suggest actually is pausing this at each place. So maybe before you get to this place, pause and go back and take a look at the barriers and analyze that. And then what we see is if these barriers are existing, they're interfering with value creation in our organization. So we need to identify some levers that can be interpersonal and structural in our organization to support collaboration by reducing these barriers. So I'm going to kind of quickly talk about these, but in your spreadsheet again, there were survey items about each of these. So a key thing is teamwork and building teams that can sit across boundaries, teams that are X teams and can do a good job of doing those X team activities to be the structural solution. They are a linkage solution, so you can look at the items there. Clear values, trying to make sure that there's clear values pulling people. I think you could think back to the role of values and vision in Valve instead of maybe formal structure, but also common goals, because they create a common fate. They pull people along. A strong vision can give passion, and it can reduce this sort of sense of hoarding or power dynamics in organizations. Finally, two other ones. One is actually thinking about the kind of people you hire and how do you develop people to be more collaborative. And one of the people levers for collaboration is to try to get so-called T-shaped people. And T-shaped people are people who have a combination of sort of deep specialist knowledge and this sort of bridging and crossing generalization. And what this requires is usually hiring people who are specialists, but making sure that they get exposure across the organization through different kinds of teamwork, through different kinds of rotations in your organization, to create these people who can both talk the tech but also understand the big picture across the organization to support collaboration. And one of the things we want to think about with people barriers is whether you're kind of emphasizing cowboys or so-called butterflies. And if we look at a 2x2 here in terms of cross-company contributions that people have versus focusing on individual performance, this is our T-shaped category. People who really understand how to contribute and understand the broad picture of the organization, and also are high individual performers. If they're not, this is the cowboy category, where people emphasize their own area, their own specialty too much. They're likely to maybe engage in more of the hoarding and not think about the benefits. Butterflies, on the other hand, are people who kind of flit around, and they do sort of understand and they carry information across the organization, but they may not have the legitimacy or credibility or capability to really understand the deep technical knowledge in our organization. And finally, if we're low, we have laggards. And if we think about what to do in organizations, we need to know who laggards are and reduce those people. We need to get better at our recruiting, not to bring those kind of people into our organization. And if we have those people, we need to either eventually remove them from the organization or figure out if there's a way to push them into one of the other categories. We need to coach T-shaped behavior, and it needs to be part of our development plans, both for ourselves and others in our organizations. We need to recruit for these kinds of people, and we need to reward people for both their individual contribution and their cross-unit collaboration. So the best way to get at this is to think about how do you address this. And one part of it is to go back to our network material and look at networks and understand networks and make sure we help support the building of networks across organizations. But the way to think about this when you talk about it with your team is that there were items, again, on the survey, and the unification lever items are these 4 questions, and you would sum these, and I've got that in the spreadsheet. The T-shaped people lever, this gives you an idea of how you might create T-shaped people, and this survey questions asked you how well your organization is doing at creating the systems to support T-shaped people development. And then finally, there's 2 last ones you guys can read on your own here, but the network lever, understanding this for yourself in terms of how well you understand your networks, and you can combine this view of networks with what we did in the Power and Politics class. And then the final items on the survey for you to discuss are these company-wide network levers, to ask questions about what does our company do? Do we have systems in place to think about supporting the formation and continuity of networks that can help things like lowering the stranger problem, increasing the ability to move tacit knowledge in the organization. So in sum, I'll go back over here to the spreadsheet. If we go to the very end of this now, here's the T-shaped people. I'll slide it here. T-shaped people lever, unification lever. And so here are the questions, that ask these items to see what the average was across those. And, again, we can find cases where some of the organizations you guys work in do a great job of the unification lever. We have some very low scores on T-shaped people levers, but there are some higher ones. So the point of this exercise is to share with each other, because hopefully within your team you're going to see some variation, and you can talk to your teammates about, okay, your company seems to do a good job at identifying and developing T-shaped people. What does that look like? And then when you share that information, it's a source of new ideas for you to think about bringing into your organization to improve those levers. So overall, that's what this activity is about, and this lecture should help you guys work through it and just stop and pause at each place and provide some backdrop to work on the collaboration activity in class.